Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jamie Steve. I work with the Tamarack Institute, and you are joining us today for the webinar titled Breakthrough Community Change, Lessons for Changemakers. So we're going to start today with a gratitude and acknowledgement. We're doing this so that we are just reminded of how we incorporate the truth and reconciliation calls to actions into our work. I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, colonially known as Waterloo, Ontario. And I encourage everybody to share where they are joining us from in the chat box as and introduce yourself. We'd love to hear about who's in the room today and what territories you're coming in from. And with that, I would like to introduce our formal host today. Sylvia Cheuy is the Consulting Director of Collective Impact at the Tamarack Institute's Learning Center. She has both practical knowledge and firsthand experience of what it takes to engage and mobilize diverse sectors to find innovative solutions and work together to make them a reality. She is a longtime champion of the importance of wisdom and the contribution of context experts, and believes that their contributions are perhaps the greatest untapped resource in the work of addressing communities' toughest challenges. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Sylvia.
Thanks so much, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so grateful to have so many of you with us today. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you our presenter keynote today, Mr. Paul Bourne, who I'm sure is familiar to many of you. Paul is a renowned community builder, and he is Tamarack's founding CEO. And what you may not know is that Paul was my original connection into Tamarack when he became my host and coach when I was doing work in my own home community. And it's been an incredible learning journey since then. So I'm thrilled to welcome you, Paul, to today. And I'm especially thrilled that you're going to be sharing with us highlights of your yet to be released new book, Breakthrough Community Change. So welcome. I'm so looking forward to our chat.
Thanks, Sylvia, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I know your days are busy, so I hope we're going to make this really worth your time.
So this is perfect. I'm going to start us off, and I'm going to ask everyone, if you can, take a minute and think for you personally, what is one word that describes how you feel when you've experienced a breakthrough? I'm going to ask you, when you're ready, type it into the chat box, but don't hit return yet. We'll give everybody a chance, and then we'll get everyone to post them all at the same time. Beautiful. So many great words.
Kind of like a release, an opening. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's that relief sense that people are also talking about, right? Because you've got a big stake in this and you're not sure. So that's fantastic. Thanks, everyone. And it feels like the perfect opening, Paul, to our first question. What compelled you to write this book? Gotta say, 20 plus years of doing community change. Why a focus on breakthrough?
Well, thanks for that question, Sylvia. And again, just wanted to thank everyone for being on the call today. There is a basic reason. I mean, I've coached hundreds of cities around large scale change. And I had written this seminal paper on building a common agenda for collective impact. And that seemed to be used over and over again. And I always promised everyone that I would write the whole thing, right, from beginning to end, and take people through the whole cycle, the guide of change. And so when I stepped back from Tamarack, I said, I have the time. I proposed it to my publisher. They loved it. And I wrote it, But more importantly, we live in very challenging times. And, our communities are facing unprecedented issues. Sometimes they're challenges and sometimes they're opportunities. But how do we capture them? And also kind of with COVID, I kind of describe COVID as, when you're making ice and then somehow you take them out and you forget to put them back in the freezer, your ice cubes, and then they kind of melt and then they all melt, then they all freeze together. I kind of feel like that's what's happened to our communities. Like, we don't know what to do coming out of COVID. We're hesitant around taking bold action, particularly action that requires us to unite everyone. And so we hunker down and we all do our good work. One of the things we realized long ago is that a lot of good work in a community, as important as that is, doesn't necessarily create the kind of change that we want. And so my sense is that we need breakthroughs versus incremental change. And our experience is in seeing so many communities make major differences, significantly reduce poverty, significantly tackle climate change issues, significantly deal with cancer rates as we did in Maine, to look at economic opportunity, to deal with racism and inequity. We need to unite. We need to unite as a community. We need to have a common agenda, and we all need to be working together, pulling at the oars together, right? Why is that so critical? Because without that, the work is, the work we do creates better lives. But as we say in poverty reduction, we don't want better poor, we want less poor. So how do we actually deal with it in a way that creates great communities? And that's what Breakthrough Community Change is trying to tackle. I'm hoping it's an easy to pick up, to read, to use as a guide. And it's going to be a good contribution that way, I hope.
I just love the way you framed it. I was watching in the chat, lots of folks really resonating with that analogy of the ice cubes. And I think you're right. I think people, like, on the one hand, COVID has really shown to us how vulnerable we are, and actually the structural flaws, I think, in many of our systems. But either because we're exhausted or overwhelmed, it's really hard, as you say, to imagine what that first step looks like. And so hearing you say so clearly, it's about coming together and figuring out what that first step is as a first step, I think is really refreshing. So tell me, sifting through all your experiences, all the work you've done with so many great communities around the globe, really, how did you think about the right way to kind of pull the content together? What's the right sequence to have it make sense for folks who really want to take this work on in their community?
Oh, like, for an author, that's a great question, and I mean, it was such an interesting process, but I wanted to sit back and say, who's going to read it? And how is the book going to be used? Right? That was what was most important to me. And so I kind of envision it that there is a community champion or two that are going to read it, and they're going to go, oh, this is so interesting. And then they're going to maybe already be in a collaborative process that they want to do more. Or they're wanting to build momentum, and they'll create a bit of a book club. Okay. So maybe, 50, 75, 100 people reading the book, and from all different sectors, and discussing the change. And in doing so, starting to think about, how are we going to make our community better? And so the book kind of starts out with kind of challenging mental models. How do we think about change? And why is that important? And how do we begin to unlearn the processes that are sort of keeping us frozen together, not acting, the way that we need to. You know, a good example is in my hometown. We used to have, I was just talking to Joe Mancini, who runs the working center today. And he said, you know, there used to be 50 people that were homeless. Now we have 1,200. And he talked about, you know, the negative effects of the new drugs on the street, the fentanyl-based drugs, and how they've created so many psychotic episodes. And that homelessness is completely different than what it was. Well, I mean, that problem is not going to go away because we all work harder and we all work even smarter, right? We need a breakthrough. I mean, right now we're overwhelmed by that problem. And we think of that as climate, we think the same kind of thing about climate change, about certain quality of life and health issues. You know, at times and in different parts of the world, we think about it in terms of equity and racism, right? There are overwhelming issues. So I wanted us to sort of think, okay, if we keep doing what we're doing, how many of you think we're going to make things significantly better? And that's what I want. In these days, we need to make things significantly better, and we need to do that soon. And to do that, we need to unfreeze people and have them excited and motivated and all those feelings that were described in Breakthrough. We need that in the community. And so my hope was that they could use the book to organize, you know, have people read it, have them discuss it, you know, have different people speak about different topics, because there's loads of people in your community that are really smart about all these issues. You just need to hear them and bring it together, right? Link with the Tamarack Institute, bring out that knowledge that is so necessary for the change. And then it just goes through the process, a common agenda. How do we implement the process? How do we then move toward impact? I've even got a chapter on, you know, do we wind down or continue on after a certain period of time? I talk a lot about campaigns in the book, about sort of structuring it where we start phase one, where we build a unity, a collectiveness, an understanding, and what are some of the best practices in how to do that, right? And then move into sort of developing a campaign and working with your community to get to the outcome you want. But that's only half the book. So once you get through half the book, then I dedicate the second half of the book to what I call the core skill sets. And these are the things that Tamarack has advanced for a very long time. So I start with asset-based community development and just the importance of that understanding in a community, that when we work with people, we work with them, not for them, not at them, but with people, right? You know, done with, done by, not done for, right? So we need, that's an important thinking system that creates large scale change. We want to know about community engagement and the latest techniques and strategies about how to really bring people together, and that it motivates them to work further. Another chapter on community innovation. Another chapter on collaborative leadership. How do we, if we're going to have these campaigns, how are we going to lead together, right? And you know, I have to write a chapter on collective impact because it's really the most advanced understanding. Whether it's something that you buy into or not, it is the most advanced understanding that we have today around collaboration. It's not the only understanding, but it's an advanced understanding, and we need to know it. And then I wrote a chapter that was a catharsis for me, and I worked with Mark Cabage on it, related to evaluations that support large-scale change. And that was critical because I've worked on evaluations that have just so demotivated communities. And if you read this chapter, you'll understand why it's so important that we have evaluators as partners that motivate, that help us learn, that help us take the work to another level. So first half is about the breakthrough community change we're talking about. The second half are the skill sets. And what's going to be so great about those skill sets is that you're going to find in your community, there are people with a high level of expertise in almost every one of those areas. And if you don't have those people, there are so many places, including Tamarack, maybe even most importantly, Tamarack, that will be able to provide you loads of free learning in that area. And then if you want to go to a more advanced level, there's seminars and webinars that they provide outside of that. Does that answer it for you, Sylvia?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that really struck me is how you've devoted half the book to really challenging people's paradigms. And I think that's really part of the unsticking that people, you know, how we get people unstuck. So I think that that's fantastic. I think especially since this work is often about blazing a new trail, right? It's often about doing something that's never been done before. And as opposed to the safety that many of us feel around, oh, this program worked over here and it's already been validated and it's just a question of us putting it into practice. And this work is so much more, right? Because it is about having to think together in new ways, which I understand is awfully scary, all the better for giving folks the second half of the book, right? Which is those skill sets to have some handrails, if you like, and feel a bit braver about taking that work on. Any key takeaways for you in particular about the skill set? Any additional advice you would give? You know, I've heard you say, let's look in the community. Odds are there's lots of folks who have these skills already there and lots of places you can look for support. But what do you really like? How does a community really know that they're kind of moving in the direction and they're kind of building out their skill sets and really laying a good foundation?
Well, Sylvia, I'm going to just tell a little story and then I'm going to pass it back to you because you've been through this process a long time ago already, and you teach it so beautifully now. But you know, when you were working in Orangeville, in Headwaters, you know, I'd love to hear that breakthroughs, your breakthrough moment in that process. But you know, I had to kind of come up with a seminal story. They always ask you to do that as an author, and I thought back, and it started off with me like this. When I grew up, there was this wonderful story, and I was a young sheltered boy, you know, but I remember hearing this story about this little boy who is walking on a seashore and sees all of these starfish that have washed up onto the shore. Everybody read this? It's probably a Hallmark card of some sort. And, you know, he starts throwing them in the water one at a time, you know. And this gentleman walks up to him and says, "So what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm saving the starfish." And the man looks around and there are like thousands of starfish on the shore. And he said, "But can't you see? It's useless. There's just too many." And the little boy picks up one more and it says, "Well, at least I helped this one," and threw it in, right? And I love that story. I don't know why, it just resonated with me. I always remembered it.
At the end of the day, hope, right?
Yeah, then I thought, okay, I love that tenacity of that boy, and I hope I never lose that. But the gentleman was kind of right? And I think I said, if I was that little boy today and knew what I knew and had the skill sets to make this happen, I would throw 5 or 6 starfish in just because, and then I would run to the nearest village. And I would tell people, the starfish are dying. The starfish are dying. We need to help. And I would find those people that were interested in helping. And you know, because we have these skill sets about how to talk about this and how to engage people and how to engage them in the idea. And I'd bring as many people as I could down to the shore. And I'd get them to start working together with me not for me, but with me. And we'd start putting as many in as we could. And yet they keep coming. The problem's not getting better. They keep coming. What's going on? And so then I would start to look at the people and I would say, who knows about the sea? Who knows about starfish? Help us understand. What do you think is happening? And I'd gather them together and we'd have a quick conversation. And then we'd say that probably say, we got to go see what's going on. Right. And then as a working group, we'd go out and we'd find out what the problem was. And then we'd say, okay, in order to change this, we need these and these strategies. We'd all work together. And eventually we would come up with a strategy that we could all implement and hopefully save the starfish. Right. And I know that beautiful story of this little boy having this tenacity, and that's an important skill set all to itself, right? But we need to figure out more. And that is in organizing our community and working at a united front. And I'm going to take you back to the homelessness situation in our community. We're not going to end homelessness by providing more housing, because it seems like the more housing we provide, the more homelessness there is. There are so many people waiting for affordable housing, right? I'm not saying don't build more affordable housing. We need to build more affordable housing, but we need to do much more, right? And that's the case here. We need to unite and get everyone who cares about homelessness talking and making it a community priority. And then we need to start to create a lot of different things based on a core strategy. And then most importantly, and I was sharing this with our regional chairman, the mayor of all our mayors, we need a measurement system. We need to get everyone, and this is one of the key learnings from collective impact for me, is that when we have a shared measurement system, we start to track the problem at a level that we can all understand. And we can understand almost on a monthly basis how it's getting worse and how it's getting better. And we can understand that it's not about homelessness. It's about 100 different reasons that people are homeless. And we've got to tackle all those 100 reasons at the same time. We can't act in a generic way when it requires us to act in a specific way. Anyway, that's kind of my answer. But Sylvia, talk to me about Headwaters, Communities in Action, and you had a series of breakthrough moments there.
What really
but it was a breakthrough change for your community overall.
Well, one of the things that really resonated, Paul, was when you were talking about the power of campaigns, right? That even though that this effort to enhance the well-being of your community is like a decade or multi-year journey, thinking in terms of 5-year sprints, 3 to 5 year sprints, I think is really, really wise. Because if you don't have a quote unquote election day, right, you can forever be in conversation. You can forever be thinking, and I struggled with this, right? Looking for that perfect solution. And you've just told us it isn't one, right? It's a multitude of different solutions. Yeah. So I remember we had beautiful conversations with so many diverse people, and we kept bringing it back and showing everyone what the common themes were that were emerging. And it built this sense that we really truly were a community. Even though there were these disparate groups, we were all striving and hoping for a very similar future. And then it was time to sort of pick a couple of projects to get underway, or a couple focus areas to get underway. And I was terrified, because the moment you pick some, right, that means that others are going to come along later. And so some of your biggest champions may not see as much of a reason to stay at the table. And yet we desperately needed them there. And it was this horrible knot in my stomach. And I remember a funder looking at me and saying, Sylvia, you guys have been doing such a great engagement job. If you don't pick some work that people can get busy doing together really soon, you're going to lose everybody.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of wisdom in that, right? And so bringing everyone back together, and you were there, we did this beautiful keynote where we kind of shared the highlights of what we kept hearing again and again from folks. There was a lot of resonance in the room. Yep, these 6 ideas, they're exactly right. Interestingly, almost all of them had many different organizations and groups from different sectors, all who had a stake in these key projects and priorities, but none of it had what was needed explicitly in their mandate, right? So no one felt that it was their job to kind of lead it forward. And we're thrilled that there was a collaborative effort willing to bring that leadership forward. But I do remember the other piece of wisdom was folks in the room saying, just pick one to get started. Pick 2. Don't try to do all 6 at once because you're not going to get enough momentum, number 1. And number 2, never forget that there is a lot of skepticism about how effective a collaborative effort can be. And so always half of your job is doing the project and making progress on that priority. The other half is proving and demonstrating the power of collaboration and why working in this way works. And I think that was dead on.
Do you remember the CEO of the hospital? And we were all in a meeting together, and he said, with all due respect, I enjoy meeting with all of you, and we've been meeting for years around to collaborate. But the reality is we've actually never done anything together. So that was kind of interesting that the collaboration was to get to know each other, to be friendly, but you haven't actually done anything together. And he says it's high time we do. That was interesting, right? Then what was so interesting about your community is that what were you, 11 townships or 14?
Dufferin County is 8. And then we also pulled in
Headwaters.
Caledon, right? The town of Caledon as well. And Headwaters has this sort of vague boundary,
but
right? It's not all one firm thing.
What was interesting is that I remember Ernie Eves, the MP, tried to bring in some legislation that would force the community to work together. And people said, no, we're all independent. So those communities, none of them wanted to work together, right? But somehow you started in Orangeville, and after about a year and a half, everyone joined in and you became the Headwaters Collective. And I thought that was amazing. That was just not a breakthrough. That was a miracle that they would all want to work together, and that they said, no, we have so many things in common. And I think truly that was your breakthrough moment.
I think that was
all those communities agreed that they have something in common. And then they created a trail system between them all.
Which was such a great metaphor, right?
Yes. Sorry?
It was such a great metaphor because it actually connected the communities in a very tangible way.
Yeah.
The other big thing about that I always remember, of the 6 priorities, you're right, trails was the first one that everyone enthusiastically jumped in to collaborate around. The then Tourism Association said it was the #1 reason folks called them from outside the community. Where are the
trails?
And they didn't have a single map, right? They didn't have a coherent place to direct people. But the other thing that I found really interesting is, personally, if I had looked at those 6 ideas, trails was certainly not on the top of my list in terms of what I thought would have the biggest breakthrough for community. But I learned something really powerful, because the moment someone proposed it, all of these disparate groups and individuals
came together,
started popping up and saying, well, if it's trails, I'm in, right? So you had the Conservation Authority, the public health folks, you had the municipalities, you had the service clubs. And who knew that same hospital CEO, right? He was an avid cyclist. I had no idea. Yeah. And he said, listen, if it's trails, I am in.
Well, and it was
learned if it's that easy, right? If it generates that much passion, of course, that's where we start.
Well, and it was so symbolic of well-being, which is what your whole campaign was about. Is they were concerned that people were commuting so many hours into Toronto that they wanted to have a well-being strategy for the region.
Yep.
And everyone bought into that. So anyway, kudos your way. And you learned so much and you had so many skills to bring that community
And I
together.
had a great coach, like, let's just say it, right?
Well, thank you for that. It was a lot of fun.
So
We've worked
as
together
someone,
for almost 20 years.
it's true, eh? As someone who's made the work of community your life's work, what do you think, what do you see when you look into the future of community change?
Yeah. I'm worried.
Say more.
I'm worried, I see so much anger out there and it pops up in weird ways, huh? And like for someone like I'm an optimist, I'm almost an obnoxious optimist, right? People are afraid, and the future is uncertain. And so when I think about global, I freeze. And then I think, okay, but what about my community? And then I lighten. And I think we need to make great livable places for all. That's the future. Not for the few, because the more we isolate, the more we sort of work against one another, right? And we say, well, these are the rich neighborhoods and these are the poor neighborhoods. And we don't want people living in tents because it makes us uncomfortable. And we don't want beggars and we don't want, all those things that make, and that, climate change is a rich person's prerogative. No. When we improve even the smallest things in our community, it improves the life of all. I remember when wheelchair ramps came in and I thought, wow, right? It was just so much easier, particularly in the winter, to walk on sidewalks when you don't see them, and someone plowed it out. Walking up ramps, with a stroller when I had little kids. So here we made things better for people in wheelchairs, but it made things better for all the parents with strollers, right? And that's how we need to look at this united work. And what I find important is that we may disagree on politics. In the United States, it's so polarized between Democrats and Republicans. And in Canada, the conservatives and the liberals and the New Democrats and the Green, they're not like, it's getting more and more a fight for people to be heard. And just because we disagree in politics doesn't mean that we don't agree about what we want for our community. We want our communities to be safe places for us and our children. We want there to be opportunity for us and our children, right? Opportunity for making a living and so forth. We want our communities to be fun and we want them to be beautiful. Everyone will agree on those fundamentals. And so the question is, how are we going to do that? And by working in this breakthrough community change way, we can also break down the barriers between us, right? If we're going to build fences, I want the fences to be places where people come and sit on and talk to each other, and agree on what are we going to do together. And so the business person and the community activist and the preacher and the single mother, the neighborhood organizer, all of them can find a place to talk and agree on the community they want. And then more importantly, start to build the skills to be able to act together. I know that almost everyone on the call today is a facilitator of some sort. You're a community leader that is able to go into your community and organize. And I just hope that this book will give you, I wanted to make it easy to understand. I did 14 rewrites had so many people, including Sylvia, that gave me like 10 pages of notes of things I needed to improve on the book. And so the goal was to make this something that is easy to understand and then to use as a reference guide, like my community conversations book was. And that it makes the work easy for you, and it makes it easy to use the book to organize your community.
You know, when I'm listening, Paul, it reminds me of seeing some research done by the Boston Federal Reserve Bank. So after the global economic meltdown, right, 10 years go by, and they go out and they look at a whole raft of mid-sized cities who took a really big hit. They were predominantly manufacturing based, right? And here, 10 years into the future, there were a number of them that they called resurging cities, right? So they're starting to really bounce back. And then there was an equal number, pretty much, who weren't. So they really wanted to try and understand what was the difference, what was going on in those communities that were able to resurge versus those that weren't. And it was that breakthrough community change piece. It really came down to two things that they could find. One was that the leaders of the resurging communities gave up waiting for someone outside to rescue them. They came to the realization that if they wanted a breakthrough, they needed to come together as a community and figure out what that looked like. And then the second component was that they needed leadership from across many different sectors who agreed to champion this effort and really help move it forward. That was it, right? And so I can't tell you how excited I am to see, you know, not only that affirmed and that paradigm kind of outlined for people so clearly, but also those skill sets that you're talking about, right? How do we actually do this? The nuts and bolts of what we need, what approaches we need to think about. I just think it's really exciting and timely. So tell me, now I'm all curious, give us some logistics, Paul. When do we get a copy of this book? How do we get a copy of this book?
Lovely.
What's happening?
Well, and before I do that, if you have questions, we still have about 15 minutes. So put them in. I see a couple in the chat box already, but put your questions into the chat box and Sylvia and I will work at them together and see if we can give you some insights. Well, you know, Sylvia, it comes out in April. And I think the day is shifting a little bit. Amazon, if you go on Amazon, it sets the date. And the reason for that is that it's all done. It's desktoped and everything, and now it just has to be put together. It gets sent to the printer. There's a 6-month waiting list at the printer, so I've known the printing date, February 22nd, for a very long time already. And it gets printed, and then Penguin is the distributor. So Penguin Books is the largest distributor in the world, and it will go for a global release. So it takes them a few months from printing to get the books shipped out to bookstores around the world. And then in April, we're going to have a big book launch. I'm going to have a series of them in person if you live in the KW area. And then we'll be going across the country doing webinars, and not just Canada, the United States. We're in dialogue with people in Australia, in Ireland and Scotland, and in other places. We're going to be doing these one-day workshops that you can bring your community together to learn and think together. And I'm hoping, Sylvia, you'll do some of those with me. I would love that. And so anyway, that's kind of the timeline, and the release will be all through 2023 and 2024. And hopefully we'll be in a city near you. If you're interested in helping organize something like that, reach out to me at pauldborn@gmail.com or reach out to Sylvia and we'll start putting you on those lists. Anyway, excited to do that part and to be part of communities and working with them.
So guess what? Well, two things. One is we're thrilled to let everybody know that everyone on this call today, your name has just been put into a virtual hat. And after this call is over, Jamie is going to pull 5 names from the hat. And you 5 folks we will reach out to by email, and you will be among the first to get your own free copy of Breakthrough Community Change. And you have an option of whether you want a print version or an e-version. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And we've already got some really juicy questions floating in, Paul. So can I bring one forward from Lois? So Lois asks a really great question about how do we develop a narrative that all of us find motivating and compelling, each in our own way. So it's that paradox,
Great.
right? A
Yeah.
unifying narrative that resonates with all of us individually. How do you do that?
My experience, Lois, is that we all want that narrative in our community. And so we need to start talking about something and then finding the language together. And so I often think about, it doesn't matter if you start talking about poverty or climate change or equity. I mean, communities are at different places on different issues. So I remember, being told the story at Hamilton, and this is one of the stories in my book, about where they started talking about sort of poverty reduction. And one day someone talks about Hamilton is the best place to raise a child. It's a single mom. And everybody just said, that's it. That's what we want to talk about. Because there was such inequity in the high income and the low income communities. And so that really resonated in that community, and it just took off all the way to when people drive into Hamilton. That's the slogan, Hamilton, the best place to raise a child. And that became the raison d'etre of the city, of the agencies, and it united everyone. It takes about a year, I find, to have these types of conversations. And you're, of course, doing all the good work you've always done, right? So it's not like you're wasting time finding a common agenda, but the process of finding and uniting around a common agenda is as important as the common agenda itself, right? I remember, again, Sylvia, in your community, people were saying, we don't collaborate. And well, then you started to do some storytelling about that arena. How did that get built? Well, there was a collaboration and, between these service clubs and these individuals and these churches and then what about that thing? And what about that park? And what about that? And we started to see that, yes, there was lots of collaboration going on. It's just that we had to find a definition that made sense to everyone. And so that whole process of dialogue is described in the book, Lois. And anyway, I hope it's going to be really helpful. Find the answer in your community.
There's another great question comment from Tasha. So she says, would you have tips or advice for getting younger generation engaged in community projects, like the 16 to 30-year-olds? Our community seems to be all older folks making decisions rather than the young adults that will be living in these communities in the future. And we really want their participation.
There's this exercise we use called Top 100, and it gets you to deliberately think through who is already engaged and who do you need to engage. And then so young people would be part of that. And often what we like to recommend is that you bring everyone together to a big community gathering. And it's a dialogue that lasts maybe a day and a bit. Make sure young people come to that. Make sure their voice is part of that. There's also a wonderful way to have working groups with young people. But young people are love to be invited, is my experience, and they're much easier to get engaged than we think. And when you think about all the young people in your community, surely there is a small percentage that would like to get started early on. And the more that you get involved, the more that will get involved. So, I mean, that's the simple answer. Of course, then there are all the youth workers and all the agencies in your community who know so much about this organizing and engaging young people. And they need to be involved. So that you can have a youth strategy if that's important to you in your community.
One of our attendees has asked, is there an ideal number of people within a community collaborative? They give the example of a collaborative that they're with. It seems that everyone in the sector is so burned out and stretched thin right now. Is there a danger to opening up the membership to more members to share the work?
That's a great question. You know, I mean, again, let's go back to the ice analogy. Are they burnt out or are they frozen? You know, and I don't know if you ask the ice, why did this happen? And, you know, they would have all kinds of different answers, but they're not going to do anything all like that, right? They're not useful in that form. So the question of burnout is a really interesting one. And then compare the feelings of burnout to breakthrough that you have described already today. And I find that when people work this way, it remotivates them. It makes them feel light. I often talk about this work of collaboration. You know, when I have to walk on a treadmill, oh my, I hate exercise. But get me walking in the woods or even around the neighborhood, I love exercise, right? So the question is, if we work in this common agenda way, right, and we're working at the bigger issues together and we're meeting all kinds of new people, it enlivens us. And so again, in the book, you're going to be able to find the different ways of addressing these issues, of talking together. We don't need to work harder. We don't even need to work smarter. And we don't need a whole lot more money. Not yet. What we need is the ability to come to agreement, to get to know each other, to retrust one another, and to build on the good work we're already doing. And if we can do that, we can find a united approach, working with people that are completely different, that bring different skill sets than us. And we can come at this in a way that will truly enliven us. And that's the beauty of breakthrough community change, is that the breakthrough is both inner and then it creates the outer. And so burnout is not just from overwork. I would say that when I have felt the most burnt out, it's when I have a lack of hope. When all my work seems like I'm running on a treadmill and I'm getting nowhere.
You know, that's really powerful. I would also add that sometimes we can get really rigid about the only way you can be involved in this is if you sit at the collaborative table, if you sit as a leader, right? And I think maybe, but I think there's so many different ways, right, that people can contribute, that people can feel like they have a stake in this. And so, you know, those sitting around the collaborative table, you know, part of it for you and for me is to think about how can we create these opportunities? We don't have to do everything, but how can we unleash permission? If people think they need permission, go ahead, like pick up the trash, right? I remember one of my mentors saying, I will know that this community is on a good path when I see people picking up trash that isn't necessarily theirs and putting it into the trash bin, because it means that they care. And, you know, hope, care, those things, I think, go hand in hand. There's some other great comments here. I think we've got time for a couple more. The question is, how do you create collaborative networks in a world that thinks hierarchically?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I mean, I kind of want to say, well, you know, you need to create a different model. There are a lot in every community that is hierarchical. There are a lot of people that think horizontally, in a sense. And community conversations, when I wrote that book, the reason it became so popular, who could imagine that a book on community conversations would become a massive bestseller in Canada? We've sold over 22,000 copies of that book. In Canada, 5,000 is the bestseller. So you just, you know, why? Because what we got to understand is that when the way that we break down barriers is to get to know each other. to vision together, to be hopeful together. And in that world, hierarchy is secondary. And certainly there are people who have power in their position, and we need them. So there's nothing wrong with that. When it becomes a problem is that when they put up the wall of their position around them, and they, in a sense, protect them, and they become, there's a kind of a hubris that sets in, that they know better. Almost all of our leadership training today asks you to look within first, and then to listen. Know your own heart, know your own reactions, and then listen. Then you can make decisions with, not for, and hopefully create the conditions in which people can make their own decisions. That's always the hope, and that's asset-based community development thinking. So the hierarchy is powerful. And again, when we start looking at exercises like the Top 100, when we start thinking about community conversation, when we think about effective community engagement, we begin to learn how to break down those walls that people build around these hierarchies, which are false, but necessary in a sense. Hierarchies are not bad. It's what we do with hierarchy, right? When we sort of have this sense of self-importance and this sense of we know better and we do things for you. You elected us or you hired us. We do these things for you. Well, I would do a whole lot of workshops on asset-based community development if I wanted to break down hierarchy. It's a lot better than fighting them, because then people will begin to understand, okay, that's the kind of community we want.
It really reminds me of the wisdom of Vicki Kamak, who used to say, when you bring together organizational leaders and community members, everyone needs to understand that they're not the same thing, right? Organizations, there's that quote about, ordinary people don't live single sector lives. So when you bring organizations together and they're used to working in their kind of silo or their issue, and ordinary people kind of view everything horizontally, because that's how they're impacted. They need to understand that they're distinct and different. And if we can figure out ways in which those two types can dance together, as in ABCD, then we're in really good shape, right? And so, it's the other memory and realization is when ordinary people come to the table with organizations come with their strat plan. They've had 5 years to kind of figure out, this is our stake in the ground, this is what we're going to do. And yet often ordinary people aren't connected into a bigger association, right? And so I can only speak about my hope. I can't speak about the hope of every resident of the community, right? And so there's something really powerful also about convening those members, caring members of the community, to say we all have our stories, but what are the common patterns and themes that unite those stories? Because that's what the organizations need to hear. That's what the systems around us need to hear. Then we can really kind of consolidate and come clear about what we want to work on together. And I think appreciating that diversity and distinctiveness is really part of it too, and making space for those stories. Absolutely.
Sylvia, thank you for hosting this today, and Jamie for all the logistical and background work, and of course for everybody who came today. Thank you so much. It was so fun. We hope to do a bunch more.
We are so thrilled to have you, Paul, and to get this early look. Lots of enthusiasm. If folks, before you go, you can give us one word that now kind of re-examines, what does breakthrough mean to you now? That would be amazing.
Breakthrough community change,
Yes. What does it mean? What are the key words that really resonate for you around breakthrough community change? And then I'm turning it over to you. Jamie, is there anything else we need to do to wrap us up?
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Paul. All I will share before we wrap up is that we have 2 upcoming workshops, if anyone is at all interested. One of them is going to be hosted by Sylvia about Collective Impact 3.0, which I am sharing in the chat right now. And then the other one is going to be, and that one is happening November 29th. The other one is going to be about strengthening the mindset and skills for leading a collaborative, which is absolutely relevant to what we're working on and talking about today. So I have shared that as well. And just a friendly reminder that all the resources shared in the chat will be in a follow-up message that has the recording. And yeah, thank you all for joining us today.
And Jamie, we're going to do a book draw after.
Yes, thank
And
you.
then we'll
The
send
draw is
out
going to happen after,
the
and we'll
winners.
email people directly if we're going to be sending you a free copy of this book when it comes out.
And
Hey, can we put it in the follow-up resources so everybody gets to see who won?
Yes, absolutely.
Yay.
But
All right.
again, you won't get the book until April because it's not released until then. But know that in April, you'll get more than April showers. You'll get a copy of Breakthrough Community Change.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Paul. It's been
Thanks,
great.
everyone.